Good afternoon, everyone. It's really good to be back with you. I know I've not been around for a while. Today, I have a very dear friend and colleague on with me, Ian Jenkins. Ian, I can't remember when we first spoke. I think it was 2016, 17. But as an introduction to yourself, because you were so closely involved in the Merthyr Rising Festival, I'd like you just to give a little bit of background on yourself and how we met, because it was I think, a very pertinent story to lead into our interview.
Yeah, I mean, Vanessa and I met really. I'd started a festival in Merthyr called the Merthyr Rising Festival, which was broadly a sort of festival of ideas on the left, I think you'd call it. And the whole idea of the festival was that it would be, completely free speech. We would invite people from across the political spectrum, but, it was left leaning. I had Vanessa had kindly agreed to be one of our speakers. I think you're right, Vanessa. I think it was 2016, 17. You
Mm.
know, old age, unfortunately, has clouded my memory and I can't remember what it was. But I had yourself, it was Patrick Henningsen, and a few other speakers, and it was subject to a coordinated online social media attack by an ex-Guardian journalist who shall remain nameless, mainly because I can't remember his name. And various other organizations who had decided that you were obviously the worst people we could possibly get, and you were obviously conspiracy theorists and sadists, and but we came under really sort of quite sustained attack. We had another speaker as well, and we were attacked on for that reason as well. We were called
That was Cynthia
anti-Semite.
McKinney, wasn't it, actually?
Indeed, yeah, of course. And we
Yeah,
had, yeah,
yeah.
McKinney was coming to speak. So obviously we got attacked there as well as vicious anti-Semites and racists. Furthest thing from what Cynthia is, but never mind. But that year we also had Norman Finkelstein come in.
Mm.
And so again, obviously Professor Finkelstein, Dr. Finkelstein, as his name suggests, is obviously a huge anti-Semite. And so we got attacked on those grounds as well. But if you remember it, Vanessa, it was pretty unrelenting stuff. Some really ludicrous things thrown at yourself and Patrick and me. And it was at a time, if you remember, when my father was very ill, terminally ill, and
Yeah.
I did my best to defend the whole thing, but the speakers were dropped after pressure was put on sponsors and all sorts of things. And at that point, I just walked away from it all. I just quit and walked away to take care of the things that I needed to do at that time. But yeah, we've pretty much been in touch and been friends ever since.
Yeah,
Um,
and one day hope
you
to actually meet. And
me.
I would like everyone to also understand that Ian, um, unlike some people that came under these kind of attacks during the 10-year war against Syria, you kept your integrity and you defended freedom of speech. And I think, you know, that's something that we're seeing under even heavier attack with what I call the COVID project that started almost 2 years ago. And the reason that I wanted to speak to Ian, and I have actually wanted to speak to you for some time, because I feel you bring such an educated and intelligent and informed, but also a very humane, what's the word, sort of review of what is going on. I mean, we communicate in a group chat, and Ian is someone that always sort of brings home to us the very real suffering of what I would call the working class, but also the already impoverished class. So in other words, the people that were already suffering under a burgeoning totalitarian state. Can you speak a little bit, as discreetly as you want to, about your involvement with these very marginalized people, and just let us know how you perceive their suffering has increased under the measures brought in to counteract a non-pandemic?
Well, I suppose I can answer that in two ways. I mean, first, just into my own background and where I live. I mean, I live in a town that's like the kind of poster child for post-industrial Britain, which is Merthyr. It's a town entirely built on industry, mainly coal and the steel industry, mainly iron and steel. And of course, it's now a town where you've got 65,000 people living on top of a mountain with no real reason to be there. And we've, in the decline of those industries and as they were offshored and sent elsewhere, I've seen the sort of gradual decline and really the sort of ignoring and the turning away from my town and its people. And in terms of, now and day to day, apart from that, I work now as for a large advice organisation who shall remain nameless as a debt advisor, a benefits advisor, is sort of helping people with advice on their money issues, on dealing with fuel poverty, dealing with not being able to feed their kids, all of the issues that come up in those communities, in communities like mine. So that's the kind of standpoint, the sort of viewpoint that I've come to my analysis from, really. And yeah, so there's been so much focus on very narrow focus on a very narrow aspect of public health, and that has been to the exclusion of, it seems to me, almost all other social matters and human matters and the consequences.
What are you seeing, let's say from March 2020? Are you seeing an incremental rise in the problems that you're dealing with, or are you seeing the same number but just an increase in the pressure? How are you seeing it rolling out?
I mean, the first thing to say is, obviously, as I said, these are already communities that have suffered unbelievable sort of blows, economic blows, and which already had huge economic and social problems, but those have been compounded in this period by really just this seeming attempt to almost transform how society operates. So I've seen consequences for the people who are already vulnerable, who already may have had mental health issues, mainly sort of depression and anxiety that we see a lot in our clients, which I always feel, rather than being some kind of pathology, is just a sort of rational reaction to their circumstances. To be depressed and anxious would seem to be the rational reaction to that. To be blissfully happy with increased poverty would be a very strange reaction. But I think in this situation, I think not only as their problems being compounded, they've not been able to see perhaps the support networks that they previously had, whether that's support workers, care workers, mental health teams, GPs. That's been withdrawn from them, but also they've lost a lot of the things that may have just given them, the support of normally functioning society. Whether that's the pub or, for some people maybe less these days, the church. It's a terrible thing to say about my people, that the pub may be more important than the church, but, there you go. I don't judge, I'm not religious but, but along with that, I've seen poverty spread out to others. I've seen more people in the last 2 years who have never encountered the benefit system in their life suddenly having to apply for universal credit. Or people who were managing their finances perfectly fine, losing 25% of their income because maybe they were on furlough. I saw the can get kicked down the road for a certain period of time, where you had the sort of moratoriums, the holds on, bailiff action or eviction or those type of things. But we always knew, we were sitting there thinking, this is kicking the can down the road. And the tidal wave is going to hit at some point, and you're going to have to deal with all these things. And it was just incredible to me. It just seemed so incredibly obvious, just so egregious that would be the result of those measures. And of course, that's why we've never done that for an infectious disease.
Yeah.
Never instituted lockdowns for, a pandemic or an epidemic of a respiratory disease for that reason.
Mm.
Because if you destroy those support networks, you destroy those things, you destroy people's economic and mental well-being, they are less well equipped to deal with any other health issue.
Mm.
And that's why it was incredible to me from the start that that is what was being done. I couldn't see any other outcome of it. And it turns out that there wasn't any other outcome.
And it certainly doesn't look as if there is going to be any other outcome for the foreseeable future. I mean, we know that there are marketing budgets in place to keep the whole narrative running for at least another year, if not further. And that these measures are not going to be alleviated anytime soon. So, for me, I mean, I'm guessing that what you're seeing in Merthyr is being mirrored in other hard-hit
Yeah,
areas in across the country.
it is. And just to explain, when this all started, I was actually working in a project that was national. So I could have been speaking to people anywhere in the country at that point. And it was the same issues everywhere. And what we were seeing is exactly what you'd expect to see, people with small businesses, and that's your sort of cafes, small hotels, guest houses, any number of sort of hospitality businesses and other businesses basically going to the wall, things that they built up for years, their families may have built up, or losing their work in those sectors that had suffered worse. And for those people, to enter the welfare system was just bewildering because it isn't something that they ever envisaged themselves doing. But there was a part of me that felt that that is what the intention was. It just seemed like the intention was to make people dependent on the state.
Yeah.
That's the only way I could see it. And I still think that. I haven't changed my mind about that.
And how easy is the state making it for them to become dependent on the state?
Well, that's another question entirely. The welfare system has always, been a Byzantine nightmare that would make Kafka weep. But obviously, with the additional workload and the fact that, they were also working from home, they were also doing WFH, which is used as an excuse for every single bureaucratic inefficiency, possible. Because of COVID, this may take 3 months before you get any money.
Yeah, I've
it's
heard that.
become the excuse for everything, because COVID.
Yeah.
I think you could sort of say BC, because COVID.
Yeah.
That's the excuse you're going to get. But yeah, it was particularly horrendous. They entered that system at a time which was particularly nightmarish for them. And the delays and the time that they could end up waiting, are just horrendous, and we do our best to advise and everything else, but we can't make the Department of Work and Pensions move any faster than they were.
A quick question, because I don't know whether you would be aware of this, but certainly I think it was last year I cashed in a very small pension that I had from when I was working in the real world.
Right.
And when I spoke to someone on the switchboard or one of the advisors, they basically asked me why I was cashing it in. And he then said to me, well, because of Corona, we're getting literally thousands of calls per day with people wanting to withdraw their pensions. Now,
Yeah.
I'm assuming that you're probably seeing this type of thing also. And of course, this is going to have potentially disastrous financial effects further down the line, presumably. But the government seems to be, let's say, we'll be kind and say they seem oblivious to it. Or do you feel that all of this is pushing us towards a deliberately managed economic disaster?
I can't see how it could be seen any other way, and I've really stopped giving them the excuse of incompetence.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe that people in government are that incompetent. I don't see, well, maybe not politicians, but civil servants aren't. Civil servants are very, to the most part, particularly in the higher levels of the civil service, very astute, very knowledgeable people who would have a very good idea about what the consequences of doing something like this would be. I mean, in some ways, you can't even blame the sort of virologists and the public health experts. You know, it's kind of to quote, C.S. Lewis and the idea of the tyranny of scientists. The worst thing is that, or the tyranny of experts, the rule of experts, is that people speaking outside their subject. They think they are speaking to the knowledge that they have maybe about a virus or infectious disease, but they don't know anything about economics. They don't know anything about social interaction. They don't know anything about mental health. They don't know any of those things and don't consider them. In many ways, they don't consider humanity other than as a vector for disease. So they can almost be forgiven. Who can't be forgiven are the politicians and the civil servants who take that advice and treat it as a mandate. Because they should be really looking at the broader considerations that form the duties of government. And that is, how do we maintain a society that functions? How do we try to ensure people have the basic things they need or the ability to make those things for themselves?
Well, it's human dignity, isn't it? I mean,
human dignity, basic humanity, and that's what's missing. And it's ironic, really, and you know this, Vanessa, any of us who've been critical of it, we've been called everything from eugenicists, granny killers, callous, we want people to die, which is all absurd. I mean, all nonsensical. And people coming at us from a point of view of virtue, that what we are doing is virtuous, with no apparent capacity to see the harm, the massive harm that is being done to the society they live in, to people, to their welfare, to their sense of dignity, to their sense of connection, to all the things that make us human.
Yeah.
Ultimately. And it's fine for, again, I'll go back to C.S. Lewis. I'll actually drop in the titles of these essays later. People should go and read them. One's called Is Progress Possible? And another is called The Humanitarian View of Punishment, Theory of Punishment, and also The Abolition of Man. People should go back and read them. They're amazing, because he did talk exactly about this. But it's fine for a doctor to say to me, you should do so and so because of your condition. But whether I decide if I want to live life on those terms is something else. And, is it just longevity of individuals or of us as a species that matters? Or is it the quality of life, the amount of love and joy and connection and all of those things that matter in a human life? And it seems to me that they have gone for the bare life, pure, just longevity. That's it. Just keeping people alive. That's all. And of course, the question must rise at some point, but what life is that to be? And I don't think that question's been asked.
No.
Not that I've seen.
No, and of course there has also been, there has also been the shortening of life, of course, but particularly for the elderly.
On top of that, it hasn't even done what they purport to do. In fact, it's done the opposite, as you would expect. Isolation, depression, increased poverty. These are all killers.
Yeah.
Proven. Exactly. I mean, there is endless research on that. And it particularly, when you had the thing about, saving Granny, and did anybody ask Granny? Does Granny want to be locked up in her house, on her own? I know what my mother thought. No, I'll take my chances. Nobody ever explained or seemed to ask Granny that given this possibly slightly elevated chance of mortality, would she not want to be locked into her house? It was just, no, she's vulnerable, lock her up, which at the end of the day is treating Granny and grandpa like they're imbeciles,
Well,
children or domestic animals.
yeah, and I think what really, is shocking, and I think we kind of briefly talked about this the other day in the group, is that there has been absolutely no focus on the underlying causes of many of the deaths with
No.
COVID, not of COVID, with COVID. And of course, that
Yeah.
includes the lack of care for the elderly, which has been a thing for years before
Yeah.
COVID.
Yeah. Yeah.
The obesity, the increase
Mm,
in obesity, particularly in kids, of course, but also in older people, the increase in
mm.
diabetes, etc., etc.
Yeah,
The
all of those
increases
other
in
health issues.
respiratory diseases like asthma, and you have to start asking yourself where all of these problems originated from anyway, because probably, like me, you as a kid, we never really experienced most of these
Not to
diseases.
anything like the extent we would see now. I mean,
No.
a lot of the things that you would have seen where I came from in some of the older people would have been industrial diseases.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you might have seen silicosis, pneumoconiosis,
Mm,
COPD, things like that might have occurred in some older people, and some cancers, because they were working in environments that exposed them to that.
mm,
But that's right. The idea of sort of broader public health, actual public health, the health of the public, seems to have been completely ignored. I mean, when you can have a situation that, you're telling people to lock themselves in their houses and you shut all the gyms, I don't know how you think that is going to improve public health. What suddenly made you think that, isolation and poverty were recipes for health, when every evidence we have is that the absolute opposite is true? For Zuby, he was talking about this the other day. He's like, fitter than I will probably ever be in my life. And he was saying this was an opportunity, really. If you really did care about public health and people's health, then you could have said, right, let's all get out, let's all get fit, take your vitamin D, take your vitamin C, let's have good food. We'll make the gyms free. All of this could have been done if that's what the actual objective was.
mm.
That you could have genuinely tried to improve public health, because within a short time of this, and this is based on the government's own narrative now, not on anything I'm saying, but it was very clear who was dying. As we say, there was a very well-defined series of comorbid conditions and health conditions that you could have addressed, but they
Yeah,
weren't addressed.
yeah,
In fact, things were done that would make them worse.
yeah, exactly. And where are the unions? I mean, we know that they were decimated probably before the Thatcher years, but I think the Thatcher years was certainly the nail in their coffin. But
Yeah.
not only the unions, I mean, the left, the left has recently shown itself to be the majority in favor of vaccine passes, so mandatory vaccine, which of course is the rule of apartheid and segregation. But where is the left? Where are the representatives of these people now? Do they still exist?
I'm not sure they do. I think what would have been the unions at one time is to a greater or lesser degree been replaced by sort of members of the professional managerial class,
Mm,
who have the values of that class, really. I mean, what's happened to the left is another conversation, a longer conversation for another day. But I think what's happened, the response of the broad left, shall I say, the mainstream left, or even not necessarily even the mainstream left, but the broad left. I'm always careful not to put everybody into guess. I'm on the left. I still consider myself to be on the left, and there's that, I think you do to a degree, Vanessa, and others do that we know. But there has been a sort of transformation in the objectives and the focus of that left. And it has moved more into the sort of identity politics, a very sort of declamatory, intolerant, doesn't really deal with economics in any real way, except in the most trivial way, a very sort of debased version of that. very unable to see the sort of networks of power as they exist economically, it seems to me, and have been sort of quite effectively deflected away from that to focus on other issues, which, you know, may be important, some may not, but which don't really speak to what the left was. You know, the left that I grew up in, and that's why I ended up doing Merthyr Rising. You know, this is the type of left that I was about freedom of speech, the freedom of people to make the best of themselves that they could.
That's something, you just hit on something there. Tell us the difference. Why are those that are defending health sovereignty and freedom of choice, freedom of speech, and are against what is effectively nowadays book burning, but, you know, the censorship of YouTube, the censorship of any dissenting opinions, the totalitarian crackdown on protests, etc. Why is that being described by some who are kind of manically behind the whole COVID project as individualism? How has that freedom that you and I have, you know, I think probably intrinsically defended without even ever, well, you know, I just feel it innately inside me. But how has that suddenly been translated into, in inverted commas, individualism?
I think there's just become it's a form of a debased communitarianism that in the end there is only the individual. You know, there is only individual experience. There isn't any other kind. And you know, my understanding was always, you know, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs, you know, that everybody would have a chance to develop themselves, to be the best that they could, but to speak freely, to speak their mind without fear. And that's the only way we ever sort of fumble our way towards the truth. But instead, what, you know, we've seen put in place instead is actually a very top-down, very authoritarian, very centralized, and that kind of questioning, that type of philosophical approach to the world, if you like, that analytical questioning approach to the world, has been replaced with a very sort of cookie cutter set of ideas that once imparted to somebody, they don't really feel the need after that to really move outside those, and that they can really repeat them. I mean, a couple of years ago, I was calling this T-shirt Marxism. So this is the people who would wear, you know, Che Guevara on their T-shirt without having a clue what he may have said about anything, or, you know, it's everything reduced to a slogan. And life doesn't really work in slogans. You know, it's a much more complex issue than that. And part of its beauty is its complexity. Not that we can't arrive at truths or things that we think are truths, but I think this has been a sort of project to really to sort of take away a lot of the nuance, the complexity, and the humanity of the left. I think we've seen that happen, and, you know, it's sort of personified and ends up in the sort of NPC meme. You know, the non-player character, the one who, when you speak to them, you know that you may as well be speaking to a parrot, because they've done no more thinking about what they're saying to you than a parrot does when it squawks out, "Polly, want a cracker?" You know, and you realize you're not actually having a debate. You were being shouted at, shouted down, and there's no opportunity for you to explain your point of view. And there's even a suspicion that even if you did, they would be unable to understand it. And that's quite upsetting to see happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we went through this with Syria for 10 years, where the debate was always kept at a managed level, and a very reductionist level. So you could never expand the discussion into an area that could take into account those complexities. and be constructive, you know, and be open. You were always forced into a corner with your back against the wall and forced to fight the same old, you know,
Yeah.
and that's,
To have a label applied to you,
yeah,
then no opportunity to defend yourself against that label. And anyway, once that label's applied, nobody should listen to you anyway.
yeah,
So it's a
exactly.
very clever technique, you know, it's not new either. It's probably as old as humanity and tribalism. You know, why would you listen to this one? He's a this, she's a this. We couldn't possibly listen to you know, an sadist, an anti-Semite, an anti-vaxxer, an anti-science,
Pandemic
anti.
denier.
Somebody pushing hate,
Yeah,
hate.
yeah.
I'll be honest, I rarely feel hate in my life. It isn't something that I particularly allow in because I find it a destructive emotion. I find anger and contempt are things that I feel quite often. But hate is something that I really avoid, but I've been accused of it. And I just find it remarkable. But you know, once that accusation is thrown, then I mean, I won't. You know, there's an element of that sort of old LBJ quote. You know, Lyndon Baines Johnson, when asked about one of his opponents, what they should do, and I'll censor this, Vanessa, okay, for your show, for the easily offended. And LBJ just answered, "Well, put it out there that he pigs. You'll have to deny it." And that's pretty much the thing, you know. Put out there that he has sex with pigs, he'll have to deny it. And that's really what's done. You throw the label, apply the label then devalues anything that the person may say. However nuanced their argument, you know, and you know, as Maysel said, it's a great quote. Tyranny is the deliberate removal of nuance. And it is, you know, it absolutely is. And all the best societies, the time when our societies have worked best, is when we were more open, and that's always the choice we have. We're going to Karl Popper now. We're going into all the unfashionable philosophers who nobody wants to look at anymore. You know, the difference between an open society and a closed society, and what do we want to be? Do we want to be an open society where we can speak about anything, our doubts, our fears, our concerns, our discoveries, or do we want to be a closed society where everything comes from a central authority? And I think that is what we're always confronted with in history, not just now, but always. I think that's always the question that we face.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're defending, you know, and yeah, I mean, to describe what we are advocating as individualism is a very tired, lame argument, particularly when looking at those that are fighting in this corner, let's say, against what is being rolled out in the name of a pandemic, which is being used as a portal to bring in, you know, increased surveillance, increased poverty, increased abuse, increased depression, increased homelessness, increased drug abuse, etc., etc. And now, of course, increased pressure on immigrants with the whole idea that they can be stripped of their citizenry. You know, I mean, it's just becoming a
Like you say, I'm just
very,
about any metric of what would constitute an open or a healthy society, or society that is constructed to benefit the human,
exactly, yeah,
benefit us as human beings, is absent
yeah,
from this. And you know, I don't care. Somebody can say, "Oh, you're filled with hate. You're an individualist, whatever." But my feeling always is, then, though they won't listen to me, is that I also, you know, I'm also defending you. I'm defending everybody else, because they'll come for you in the end.
yeah. Oh, yeah,
These
I mean,
systems always do, because these type of revolutions, these type of totalitarian closed system revolutions, they'll come for you in the end. You know, I don't think they won't. And it doesn't matter really how much noise you make about being on the side of it. In the end, you'll feel the jackboot like everybody else does. So it's probably best to be aware of it now, you know.
well,
And
yeah. And I think, you know, my point always is, well, okay, maybe you are not against vaccines, being made mandatory because you believe that Big Pharma has your best interests at heart, despite their
Yep.
history of failure
Yep.
from that
And
perspective.
criminality.
But once you've accepted vaccines as mandatory, then you don't have a leg to stand on when, for example, they bring in another medication and make that mandatory, and you don't
Not just
agree with it. So
medication.
where do you go from that point? You know,
And
this
not just
isn't going to
medication.
stop.
I mean, I wrote an article a couple of weeks back, which was responding to a piece by George Monbiot, if you remember, and
Yeah.
he was kind of mocking this idea of bodily autonomy. There is no bodily independence. Well,
Really?
so rape is okay then, because it is about consent,
Yeah.
and what happens to our bodies is the ultimate defense we have.
Mm.
It's consent. So if you're going to remove that idea of bodily integrity and that we have a right to give informed consent about what happens to our bodies,
Mm.
then a great deal more than vaccinations are possible. Forced abortions, all sorts of things become possible because you've lost bodily sovereignty.
Mm.
And that's not about individualism, and because that's how they try and depict it. You just want to do exactly what you like whenever you want to do it. No, because that doesn't work either. That
Well,
doesn't work either.
I mean, how do these people, the thing is that if this were, for example, some deadly plague that was genuinely sweeping humanity, I think humanity is intelligent enough to figure it out and to
I
follow
don't think.
the precautions.
Yeah, I don't think that a disease of that kind would need as much PR and
No,
advertising.
exactly. That's my point. You know, it's
I mean, the Black Death really didn't need that. I don't think anybody needed to go through the streets of London. Get out of the way, the plague is coming. It's like, no, I'm stepping over bodies.
exactly.
My family just died.
Uh,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, but yeah, you get this sort of individualism, and I swapped the thing with somebody. Somebody said something about, yeah, for you, it's like, and it was like, I think they called me a Trumpist or something. Whatever, mate. And then said, it's all about your freedom. And I was like, yeah, well, you may think that, but the things that you were telling me now do not justify your tyranny. So, you're going to need to provide some pretty compelling, and I don't think it actually exists in terms of an argument for the level of invasion of basic individual human rights,
mm.
that you are proposing, or that you are that you are purporting to support.
Ian,
Because you're going to cross a lot of lines.
I did want to ask you, only because you spoke about it so movingly to us, about the miners' strike. And the experience that you had then, did that give you some indication of how the state will then and now turn against what I call the little people, the what is it, the dispensable class, or the useless class, as of course it's described in WEF circles. Did that give you an inkling of what was coming? And also, you work among some of the most marginalized people. What is the hope for the future? What solutions do you see? What do we all need to be doing differently in order to, I can't say stop this tide of tyranny, but at least to save ourselves and to save those around us from being engulfed in it?
Right. Well, I mean, in regards to the miners' strike, I think what came out of that for me, because my grandfather was a miner, and most of the men in my family of that generation were, and it was a big mining steel making community that it was in decline then, and that's why they were able to take them on at that point. But what I learned most about that is how good people can be misrepresented by a media and a government. And these people, remember Mrs. Thatcher calling them the enemy within?
Yeah.
Which was counterposed actually by what's his name, Macmillan, Also obviously a Tory, but you know, and when he bemoaned from the House of Lords that you were doing this to these, the best of our people, what will you do to the worst? And that was kind of, to see these people represented as violent and, you know, selfish, destructive, wanting to overthrow the society. They didn't want any of those things. You know, that was not who they were. You know, these were close-knit communities who saw that their industry, which was essential really, and, you know, for the generation of power and all of the other things, was going to be destroyed so somebody could make money. You know, and it wouldn't be them. They wouldn't see any of it. And then they were represented as monsters. And that was the lesson I took from that. And it's really what we've talked about today, isn't it? You know, that now you can call them the anti-vaxxers, I guess, are the enemy within. Is that the enemy within now? I don't know. You know,
Well, I guess
all the
the
haters, you
anti-vaxxers
know,
and the
all
Russian agents, those are the two
yeah, of
main.
course. Oh, yeah. I'm receiving tens of thousands from Putin every week, as you are. And consequently, you know, I live in absolute luxury in TikTok. You know, that's what I do. But you know, yeah, but it is that, isn't it? It's that ability to misrepresent on a grand scale.
Yeah.
And so if you can do that, then it is what we said earlier, really, that then nobody will ever listen to those arguments. They don't get a chance to be made because they are cut off at the knee by the representation that's been put out. You know, that once you know somebody's an anti-vaxxer, or, you know, back then you'd have known you know, they were an awful communist miner who, you know, probably wanted to invade the palaces of the mighty and burn them down, which they may have wanted to by the end of it, quite a few of them, but certainly not why they started. Yeah, that was the lesson. And I think it's what we always see. You know, it is a classic technique. You know, you turn that person into they are the enemy, and then they'll be silenced. I mean, the second part of what you said there, what can people do? I think the first thing is to live your life in as normal a way as you possibly can. And that's just a simple thing as a human being, you know, not to lose sight of that. You aren't owned by the state. The state doesn't control your mind. It doesn't, you know, it may attempt to. I think we've still got to focus on where in life there's joy and there's love and there's connection. And I think those are quite basic things. But in a practical way, I think we're looking at, you know, and Ian talks about this very well, Ian Davis and others have talked about it a lot, that we do need to build these parallel structures that support each other. You know, at one time where I come from, people were very good at doing that. You know, if you look at the miners, they built their own clubs, their own libraries, their own institutes. Nobody gave them money to do that. They did it by subscription and carried out the work themselves. And I think it's something like that, which is a sort of, you know, and it could be as well, if it ever, you know, ever becomes possible to do so again, that we can do that with, you know, can we do it with businesses, agriculture? Are there ways that we can build parallel economic systems? So something very much like anarcho-syndicalism, really, where there's a kind of voluntarist coming together, really, you know, to support and supply and to help each other. That I think is anything really that retains our humanity at this stage.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what the main target is. You know, I think there is a real attempt to change long term what it is to be human. You know, I think that's the ultimate goal, and how society operates and how we interact and how we are able to combine together and the extent to which we are allowed to do that.
Yeah, social cohesion is being broken down, basically.
Well, and it's being replaced by another form, or the attempt is being made to replace it with another form of social cohesion, and possibly, I know you've seen Matthias Desmond,
Mm.
and he talks about that when he talks about the mass formation. In a period where perhaps that has been lost to some degree, and where there is a sort of free floating anxiety, as he describes it, about that. It's very easy then for another power to come in and substitute something for that, to hold out something as being what community means. And that's a word that's really misused. That's one of the very, we're always told about this or that community. Now, those tend to be quite invented communities, and with that community as identified tends to come a series of ideological points that may not be held by everybody within that identity. Now, a community obviously is kind of more traditionally where you live and the people around you. But yeah, I mean, I think there is a very real attempt being made to break that down, and I think the kind of lockdowns, the banning of sort of large events, the idea that you can only have 6 people in your house, which I just find incredible that a government should even feel they can say that, is incredible to me. But there it is. And that was done on the basis of, you must think of yourself as sick, even when you're not sick. And the people who aren't sick can make other people who aren't sick, which is an insane idea based on absolutely no science. But it is a very terrifying idea because it makes you the enemy. It makes, an invisible enemy that you are the vector for.
Yeah.
And if you want to make people fear each other, then make them see each other as vectors of disease. That'll do. If you can't make them see each other as purveyors of hate or bigotry or, something else that they actually don't do, then why not just make them plague carriers, plague rats? That should make them avoid each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there is, there is always hope as long as we have, the human spirit and our belief in all those things that are terribly unfashionable, like love, honor, all of the things that are always worthwhile.
Well, I think, I mean, coming back to, we mentioned dignity, we have to remember that stripping a citizen or a civilian of any sovereign nation of their dignity is a war crime.
Yeah.
So therefore, we have to, I mean, I keep laboring this point, but we have to keep making the parallels between the imperialist wars that have been waged against developing countries or countries that have resources that those neo-colonialist countries want to get their hands on, and recognize that the same measures are being used now against us. And so therefore, we have to start defending the same things that we have defended for the peoples of other nations for decades against our own governments, because our dignity is being taken away from us. And that is a war crime. We don't have an openly declared war, but it is a war.
It is a war. And as you say, if that idea that gets misrepresented as some kind of selfish individualism is anything, it is a belief in human dignity and the value of each human being for themselves and of themselves. And without that basic idea, I mean, any amount of atrocities are possible and have been made possible in the past. And like you say, whether the first step really is to if you want to commit those type of atrocities, is to remove that basic dignity, that basic worth, to dehumanize, could be to pathologize, and that's the most basic thing, is that people mustn't lose that in terms of each other, or if they feel that they've lost it to some degree because they were taken in by some of the things they've been told, then regain it. Remember what that meant.
Yeah.
And don't think that you're being some kind of awful Thatcherite individualist. By doing that, you're not. That is not what you're being. You're being human. The best of humanity is what you're being when you're doing.
Yeah, and I
When you
think, you know,
record for somebody.
you can't give to humanity unless you yourself are whole as a human being. And I think that is very important. You know, don't allow, because once you give away your dignity, once you give away your pride in yourself, in your achievements, in your life, in your family, in your children, in your home, you know, really, what do we have left? And without that stability, and without that balance, and without that self-belief, of course, and this is what gaslighting does, of course, it strips away your ability to judge a situation. It instills within you fear of peer pressure and peer judgment. You know, and we're in that degree of victim-abuser relationship. And so therefore people need to start taking their power back in order to be able to empower each other. And that's what freedom is about. It's not about taking it back only for yourself. It's about taking it back so that you can contribute constructively to society. And that's something,
like you say, because only by perceiving that in yourself is the only way that you can see it in another.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
and you become part of that greater whole, but it isn't a communitarian whole, you know, with a centrally directed idea. It is a far more voluntary, far richer, far more real community that appreciates the value of each member for being who they are. And so I suppose really what we're in is, you know, in some degree, it's a philosophical battle, and it is. We may be almost needing some kind of renaissance where we go back and look at, you know, some of those philosophical ideas that have been under so much assault, really, now and for quite a period of time, really, and also to some degree even a spiritual battle is what is really going on between, ultimately, do we, you know, because without some basis for value, where does that leave us? And it may be that some of this has come about through an excess of materialism. That could be the case, you know. And do we need to look in that way, you know, at ideas that have become really terribly unfashionable because such a huge effort has been made to make them unfashionable, really. But I think that's our hope. And that's our hope, and it is a strong hope, because human beings have overcome some pretty awful things in our long history, some pretty terrible, you know, appalling tyranny. And it doesn't mean that those times have been the best of times, but there are times that we ultimately will triumph against. And I think the worst thing we can do is to accord more power to, you know, some of the people who may be the movers behind some of this than they actually have.
Yeah.
And that can be easily done. We can easily, because they accord to themselves the power of gods. You know, they really, I think, see themselves in that way, and that we are of no significance. The worst trap we can fall into is to agree with them. I think the key thing there is, I think it was a phrase that I think an Algerian leader made when didn't take out revenge for the atrocities committed against his people by the imperial regime of France. And I think he just said, well, they're not our teachers, and they aren't our teachers. Yeah.
I think that's a very poignant note to end on, actually, Ian.
Okay.
And I hope that there's a lot of food for thought there for people, and a lot of encouragement. And I think that's important.
It
I
is.
think it's easy, we were talking about that as well, to fall into a sort of a kind of despair because it seems overwhelming at times. But I think something as simple as regaining the center of yourself in a way.
To quote my fellow Welshman, Vanessa, rage against the dying of the light.
Beautiful. Yeah. The Welsh always had it absolutely spot on, I must admit. Oh, Ian, thank you. It was really a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks,
And
Vanessa.
please do more writing because I have to tell people that Ian is absolutely fantastic scribe, and we are trying to persuade him to do more of it. So please do.
I've got a few ideas, but as you know, I'm terribly lazy and I'll pin down.
All right. Thank you ever so much, Ian. I'll just
Okay.
stop recording and then we
Okay.
can have a quick.
Thanks, Vanessa.